Hello, wow. Oh, you don't have to. Thank you. Well, it's very nice to see you all here. My name is Adam Lerner, and I am the Joann McGrath Executive Director and CEO of the Palm Springs Art Museum, and I'm thrilled to be giving you the first of 3 talks, a biased orientation to the field of contemporary art. This is part 1, humanists, and the north point for me is Yves Klein. Yves Klein, especially this work that he did, was a performance piece called Aerostatic Sculpture. He did it in 1957 in Paris, and it's very simple. After his opening at the gallery of his monochromatic paintings, he released 1,001 helium balloons into the air, blue helium balloons into the air. And, when he released these balloons, it was a statement, of course, about what he wanted for art in general. And it was something that I think he strived for in everything he did, particularly something that he wanted in his monochromatic paintings, which is to use the finite to be able to get to the infinite, right? There's something about the space of these monochromatic paintings which sort of is suggestive of a portal to infinite space. But he called the balloon work, this is actually a better version of it. This has actually been redone enhanced by the foundation, by the Yves Klein Foundation. I like it better, even though it's not quite what he had. But the idea was that art strives for the infinite, and when you take these objects, these finite objects, and release them, then you're actually approximating what all art wishes to attain. And I think what I love about it, in particular, is that it suggests something about how meaning travels through the air. I mean, the fact that I can tell you this story suggests that one of those balloons sort of landed, with me, and I'm now handing it off to you. And they are still a part of the imagination, right? This work in some way. Yves Klein once said, he said, transported by the imagination, we attain life. Life itself, which is absolute art. And that idea of the imagination, the idea of the absolute, the idea of the relationship between the finite and the infinite, these are his deeply, what I would call his humanist aspirations. So this series that I will be giving here at the museum is a biased orientation to the field of contemporary art. And it's biased because it's the art that's meaningful to me. It's not like I'm trying to get at a comprehensive survey. I'm not trying to show you what the market says or what art historians say are the most important. I'm orienting you to basically, I have to just admit it, to my own imagination, to the way that certain artists and certain works of art have become signposts for me, points on the compass, for how I think, and this is my way of, in a sense, introducing myself to you by talking about some of the artists who have just stayed with me, who continually resurface in my imagination. So I will not be doing this in a chronological format. I'm not going to talk much about biography. I will probably even set aside most sort of museological or curatorial protocols for how we talk about art. I'm sorry, if you want that, you'll have to just go to another museum. But what I will tell you is basically why I love these things, and try in many ways to be able to share with you like how it is that they got stuck. And sometimes I don't even quite know myself. I don't really understand exactly why work is so powerful to me, and it just is. And maybe we could talk about that later. This talk is about a 45-minute talk, and then we will have some 15 minutes or so for question and answer. So I addressed the topic of humanism in this first category. Humanism is a very old-fashioned word, and well, I'm old, so there you go. But I've always been drawn to this concept, and I've always been interested in those artists who explore it because it's about new ways or finding new forms for addressing very old questions. Questions about like how we relate to our own finite lives, how we relate and connect to each other, how we relate to the things, the objects around us, the relationship between the finite and the infinite, the physical and the metaphysical. Those are issues that are specific to like the humanist sort of range of thought, and it's you can think of it as like those aspects that are in some ways pre-social, or it's not about the rules that we establish for how we live our lives. That's next week. That's the sociology talk. It's not also about like getting at our own interiority. That's the third week. That's the sort of psychology aspect of the talk. But this is really about the aspect of how art connects, how we connect as humans specifically, even though again that term is not so widely used. And in ways I like it because it actually connects art and visual arts to literature, to poetry, to all of the other reasons we have art. And to me, it's also it's a reason why like art has a significance beyond just the beautiful things, but really can actually say something about how we live our lives and how we find meaning. So here we go. So Joseph Beuys is a German artist who started coming onto the scene in the 1960s, and this is him installing. He's in the process of making a work that's called Fat Corner, and it's simply animal fat, the ceiling, and then you can also see the fat along the wall where the wall and the floor meet as well. It's the white stuff, and it might be hard to believe, but I think about this work a lot. I know. So, like, if you think about what is a corner, I'm sure you think about that a lot. No, I'm just kidding. But if you think about what is the corner of a room, right? This place where these three 90-degree angles meet. The corner implies the room, because it's the essential building block of a room, and therefore it's the essential building block of a building, and therefore it's in some sense the essential building block of the entire grid and the city and all of modern life. All of human rational order imposed upon nature can be symbolized with the idea of the corner. It's the mechanistic, the rationalistic aspect of our society. And maybe even you could say, because of the needs for efficiency, it's actually the driving force behind all of building, and mostly the capitalist sort of drivers for why we build the way we build, is because of efficiencies. And so all of that rational order is encapsulated in this idea of this hard corner. And this animal fat, this organic element, this thing that it can hold a shape, but it's very, very malleable. It's highly unstable. It's something that has actually a lot of movement to it. You can't actually control it in the same way you can control other building materials. So here, Joseph Beuys is like taking this element, this organic element, and applying it to the essence of our mechanistic society. And so it's this kind of, I see it as a kind of this healing of the wound of our modern lives, right? Adding an element of the organic to the hardness of our structures around us. I mean, I think about this a lot when it comes even to what a museum is. I mean, I actually would even go so far as to think about the fat in this sense as like a kind of metaphor for the chaotic, and the corner as a metaphor for the order and chaos and order. You could think about it, if you're philosophically minded, as like Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of the Dionysian, the wild and untamable, and the Apollonian, the rational. And I feel that there's something about the museum itself, where like we are a place that we're basically a corner. You know, we're a bureaucratic entity. We're building a structure or nonprofits. We like, in order to be able to serve you in the way that we do, we need to be a part of the system. We're part of the urban fabric. We need stability and certainty, but yet we're a place that's all about like exhibiting art, which has at its essence the element of chaos, of uncertainty, of unpredictability, of the irrational. And so what we need to do is, how can we apply fat to the corner? How can we apply the organic to the rational? And just as Nietzsche said in this first book, it's funny, I read that book my first book when I got to college, and I think about it ever since. This idea, it's called The Birth of Tragedy, where he basically says that what we need to do is to marry the Dionysian, the chaotic, with the Apollonian, with the order and the rational. And I feel like that's true. It doesn't have to be true for you, but I feel like it is. And it's also just a way of thinking. Like I also think about it, and sometimes it's like, how can we soften our world? Like art is a kind of healing. It's healing ourselves from our own tendency towards rigidity. A student of Joseph Beuys, or someone who was highly influenced by him, as she's met him a few times, and really was heartened by his performance work, is Marina Abramovic, and she'd created in the early 70s all these incredible performance pieces. And what I am so impressed by is her ability to to endure so much, to take on so much risk, and actually to even put her life at risk. Here in this work, she's lying in the center of a wooden star that she then burns, and she's means to be there for 90 minutes. She actually had to be rescued because she had lost her oxygen, and so she had passed out. But I feel like with artists like Marina Abramovic, maybe this is a great metaphor for what they're doing in general, which feels like they're putting everything on the line. They're putting everything into the fire. And to me, this sort of life and death quality that they're giving to art, like, demonstrates this kind of, like, not just a level of commitment, but it's to say that art matters more than just to be beautiful, to be like a pleasant way of spending an afternoon, but art matters in the sense of like how we even think about what is meaningful in the world. And that's actually, to me, like what a lot of these artists have in common. Some other performance works that Marina Abramovic did like also suggest that sensibility, which are just incredible. So this performance piece she did in '74, she put 72 objects on a table in a gallery, and the objects like a pen, a scissors, chains, an axe, a loaded pistol, and visitors were told that they could use those objects in any way they want to do anything they want to her. She just suffers extraordinary abuse during the course of this performance, and it's an intense study in vulnerability, and it even says something about maybe the meaning of the idea of vulnerability, because the more you see her bear on her body this kind of abuse, then even if it's consensual, then the more visible her extraordinary strength seems to be. And it's like this inner strength that you see. So like while Eve Klein was trying to locate the infinite, the eternal in space, like what she's looking for here is to say, how can the body be a means by which we can get to the soul, right? That it's internal here. So therefore, as much as I bear, it's only on my body, and there's something, therefore, but who I am is something deeper, something more eternal. And this image here that she has, a performance with Ulay, is probably the most archetypal, the most iconic, the most beautiful, even allegories we have for love, and for the more specifically for the inherent vulnerability of love. And by the way, I just say I think here you really get to see how art can start to function like poetry. Because we're accustomed to thinking about poetry in terms of like, oh, this poet will have some allegory for our life, and some ability to express some words to express something about our human struggles and our aspirations. And I feel like this work here, this image, it's like a Shakespearean sonnet, or it's Dante's Vita Nuova. It is like it encapsulates a whole form for all the old questions. And this next artist, Bas Otter, has created a series of performance works as well around the same time. He's Dutch, and then he moved to the United States. And this is a work called All My Clothes. And I don't know about you, but I find this, our things, our stuff, like our clothes, our furniture, those are the things that give us a sense of the permanence in the world. They give us a sense of permanence, right? So when we return home, our things are all there, right? That's what makes us feel like we are at home in the world, because when we get back to our house, our stuff's not on the roof, right? It's like where we left it. And that sense of our sense of our things they're not just functional. They help us orient ourselves, even to feel like we even belong here on this planet. And I feel like this image reminds us of what gives us that feeling. Not just that we have a home, but that we are even at home in the world. And this series that he did, I love, is just simply, it's this whole series of him falling. And so he did a series of performances. Sometimes he fell off of a tree, sometimes he fell off a roof, sometimes he just fell on the sidewalk. In this case, he's falling into a canal. And this is another example of how he creates these situations that exemplify the brokenness of the world. So when we walk down the sidewalk, we generally have a sense of our own dignity, or we should have a sense of our own dignity. I think what Bas Otter is pointing out is that we're never really aware of our sense of belonging on the planet, that the world was that the sidewalk was laid out there for us to stroll down, until that concept is broken. So we have a cockiness that we have, there's a cockiness that we have as humans that Bas Otter, I think, disables. I don't know if I was being clear about that. No, not clear. Well, we could talk about it afterwards, but there's something about this image that I've always found so incredibly tender, like all of his works. Maybe it's also knowing his last performance piece, which is sort of legendary, and maybe that infuses my attitude towards everything else he's did. And this is a work he did in 1975, where he set out on a very, very small sailboat from the east coast of the United States to Europe. And like his boat was found a few months later, but his body was never found. And so there's like debate as to whether or not this was a suicidal venture, like whether or not, he's creating the ultimate work of art where he himself is consumed in the work. But actually, I prefer not to think of it that way. I actually like thinking that it wasn't suicide. I prefer to think that he saw art as genuinely a search for the miraculous. Like, I think that's a really beautiful concept, that art's ability to transform our sense of aloneness into something transcendent, like that's miraculous, right? The fact that like art can just flick a switch to be able to take all of our alienation, all of our sense of being a weirdo, and make that into something that conveys our specialness. Like there's something transcendent, there's something miraculous about that. It's the thing that arrives from nowhere that changes everything. And I think, I like to think that that's actually what he was hoping for, a very gentle way of making that statement. And another artist who is the kind of artist where, like, I'm sure that a lot of people who are looking at contemporary art would say, like, now I just do not get this, or what is this about? I'm sure maybe a lot of this art is art that people say, I just don't get what this is about. And maybe this lecture will help, I don't know, but maybe it'll help at least give credibility to the whole enterprise. Bruce Nauman, with intense green light. And it's clearly not hospitable. You don't really feel like comfortable walking through it. Like, it's definitely not ADA compliant, right, for one thing. You kind of have to kind of shuffle through it, like turning on your side. And what I take this work to be about, just as I take a good deal of Bruce Nauman's work to be about, is to sort of create situations where you do not feel as if it were made for your comfort, so that you can then realize how much you take for granted in your everyday. So like the seat you're sitting on, it fits your body pretty nicely, right? The door you walk through to get in here, it fits your body. Even this space, it's big, but it's still made for bodies, right? The sidewalk you walk on, your car, your home, everything is made for you so that when you are going through your life, you generally can pretend that the world was waiting for you to arrive, right? As if we didn't build it so that you can feel that way, right? No, we just created a world that makes us feel like we are the kings and queens of it. We're meant to be there. But the world itself doesn't inherently care about us, but we just like to think it does, and that's what gives us that false sense of dignity as humans, because everything seems to be waiting for us to arrive. And I think he disables that in a really beautiful way. And this work he did, another work that makes people run away from contemporary art, but also something that I love. He did a series of works with clowns. And in this case, this clown is just screaming and jumping up and down, yelling no. And it goes something like this. No, 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 like over and over and over again. And And what I take this work to mean is that, no, I, the artist, am not going to just be here to entertain you, to make you feel good. I actually want something more of my art, than just being your clown. I'm not just going to be your entertainment. But I think it's also ambiguous, because the fact that the artist is saying no is also suggestive of the idea that no, don't look for more meaning. There is no more meaning to art than just what you see here. Don't think that art is going to be something that saves you. There is no transcendence, which is in some ways the opposite idea. But then, even then, the fact that he has to repeat it over and over suggests that he doesn't quite, whatever it is that he's suggesting, he doesn't quite believe it himself. He's got to insist on it, no, there is no meaning. There is no meaning. But if there really was no meaning to art, to life, to any of this, there's no transcendence, well then, why does he have to try so hard to insist it? And what I love about the work of David Hammons, who did this work in 1983. He's one of his earlier works that he did in New York and Harlem. It's simply a 30-foot tall basketball hoop, simply, which is studded with bottle caps. So it's kind of it looks totemic, looks tribal in a way. What I love about Hammond, tossed out with humanist bathwater, right? There's a lot of, one of the main reasons that the idea of humanism is not a popular thing to talk about is that when multiculturalism emerged and, really grew strong in the 80s and 90s, and people started becoming interested in identity questions, then the thought was that, and this is very often accurate for a lot of artists, that, the whole conversation about humanism is just talking about the sort of male, the white male, and it's trying to extrapolate the universal from that. So that's why we talk about man, man and nature, man and God, and so therefore, humanism is often considered the bad thing that multiculturalism is attracting. And I think that what I'm trying to show in this lecture is for issues of race as well as even for feminism and gender. In fact, there are very appropriate artists who create intersections between humanism and these other issues and address them both simultaneously. And I think David Hammons is one who does that very, very well. So for me, yes, the sort of the social meaning is that creating a 30-foot tall basketball hoop called Higher Goals in Harlem implores kids to aspire to become more than just basketball players. You should have higher goals. So it's a kind of educational type of mission. But it also has this totemic quality to it that suggests that our aspirations always become our religions, right? Be careful about your aspirations. We tend to worship them. And this work is just amazing. Blizzard ball sale, where David Hammons just sets up on a blanket on the corner of New York City these beautiful little snowballs that he sells for $1 each, regardless of size. Small ones, big ones, still $1. So I don't exactly know why I love this work so much, but yes, again, the social meaning, it addresses stereotypes of racial justice, so dealing with the marginal economy that so many black people, black men are forced into. And it deals with the stereotype of the black man as a hustler. But there's something more. 'Cause first of all, he looks so cool, right, in this picture. And his snowballs are really nice and carefully made. And it's as if he was saying, like, yeah, this snowball won't last, but nothing is permanent. So you might as well appreciate like the very special experience that's happening right now. You, here, me, snowball, that actually you could read it not in its irony, but actually in its face value, that actually maybe art should not aspire to permanence, but actually what we should be seeking are those just meaningful moments of encounter. A.G. Hudgens is an art collector. He's a finance guy, and he told me that there was an exhibition that David had pretty soon after this, where he took one of the snowballs and he had it in a freezer, and it was for sale as part of this exhibition. And then there was an opening party, it was a big party, everyone was having a great time. And then like at the end of the party, like somebody like looked in the freezer and the snowball had and someone had unplugged the freezer and the snowball had melted. And AG was like, I know it was David. and like which gives evidence to the fact that like for him the meaning there was really about how do we affirm ephemerality, right? Why do we need things to be permanent? But rather like it's the momentary quality that makes it special. And there was a performance work that Lorena Grady did in 1983 that I just love. It's called Art Is. And she had a float in the African American Day Parade in Harlem, where she had young actors and actresses holding, I think it was mostly actresses, and dancers, holding frames. See, that's exactly the kind of like curatorial like nonsense that my field doesn't generally put up with. You can't like make mistakes like that, but we're fast and loose here. We're the fat, not the corner. So this work is so simple, and actually like you see the joy in these people's faces, like, in these pictures. Like it's something that's so genuine. And you never see that in the art world. Just want to let you know, this kind of like this kind of pure happiness of these people, and I want to say that so many artists, in one way or another, make the statement that art is what you put a frame on, right? That's like pretty much the move in most conceptual art. But to me, nobody has their feet so firmly on the ground as Lorena Grady does here. She's right there in it. She's at a parade, right? There's nothing more democratic than that. And you feel that this is a moment of pure joy, right? A moment of grace, right? And it makes you feel that, like, oh yeah, that's the miracle of art. Like how so quickly it makes that transformation. And a Mexico City artist that I think about often, Francis Alice, did a series of performances in the early 1990s around the city. In this one, he just walked around the city and he placed pillows in broken windows. So a window is a rupture, right? It's a rupture in the membrane that provides us with shelter. And it's that when you break that barrier, then we're exposed. It's a wound in our society, and like placing a pillow is like the artist healing the wound. It's something this with taking the hard world, placing something soft in it, trying in a makeshift way to be able to fix the damage. He did one performance piece where he simply walked around Mexico City pushing a massive block of ice until it was nothing but water. And of course, if he was pushing a box or something else heavy that looked practical, then it would look like he's trying to move something, trying to get it from one place to another. And the fact that it's ice makes it about what it even means to do work. What does it even mean to try to do something in the world, to make something happen? And then sometimes, as a lot of his work suggests, that even when you don't physically change it, you've still done something that's important, and maybe even more important when you don't leave any physical thing behind. And he did this one series of performances where these are very, very I don't know what, maybe difficult, maybe obscure, maybe I find it hard exactly to tell exactly why I love these works. He did a series of performances where he traveled from one city to another around the globe. And in the words that he uses here, you could read it in the bottom. I'll read it too if you can't read it. When arriving in, name the city, in this case New York, wander, looking for someone who could be you. If the meeting happens, walk beside your doppelganger until your pace adjusts to his/hers. If not, repeat the quest in next city, and then it's Harare. And I really love this project, and I just sort of imagine him sort of traveling from city to city around the globe, from New York to Zimbabwe, to Havana, to Hong Kong, and what's so powerful to me about it is that it's the smallness of walking on the street and that fleeting quality of that action of finding somebody who could be you, compared to the absolute vastness of the globe. And the idea of traveling across the planet, walking the streets, moving through cultures, through classes, evokes the idea of the mendicant prophet, right? And the idea that you could be living that life, like that could be you. Why am I living this life and not that life, right? That cuts deep to the point of why we are here and why we're living the lives we live in a very beautiful way. And this one work he did in the Venice Biennale in 1999, isn't it so sweet, this picture? These two tuba players, right? And they're both carrying half of a tuba. And they both enter the city of Venice from different places. And the performance is for them to walk around until they find each other. And when they find each other, the person with the top puts it on the person with the bottom, and he plays a song, and then the person with the bottom plays a song on the tuba, and the other person claps. And to me, that's a very, very beautiful metaphor for the idea of finding your partner, finding a lover, finding someone who completes you. It's a metaphor for art. It's a metaphor for just like togetherness in a very beautiful way. And then this work here, When Faith Moves Mountains in 2002, outside of Lima, Peru, just like with the ice, basically what he does is he asks 400 volunteers to shovel their way across a mountain. And of course, walking across the mountain, shoveling, they don't move the mountain at all, but they've done something that is extraordinary for having 400 people, strangers, together, trying to move a mountain. When people ask me who my favorite artist is, if I don't say Andy Warhol, I might say Felix Gonzalez Torres, and there's a lot of works of his that I love that I could talk about. And this is a very, very small work. It's probably about 8 inches, and it's Paris last time, he did it in 1989, and it's simply these 2 sort of outdoor chairs, a photograph of them that is made into a jigsaw puzzle. And the idea of like these two chairs like suggests like the memory of, and the fact that it's a jigsaw puzzle like immediately conveys the feeling of fragility, that you have to, this is something that you have to hold together. It doesn't necessarily automatically stay together, that it's something you have to piece together and keep together. And so it's about memory, and it's about the memory of a couple being together. And Felix Gonzalez Torres, this was after his lover Ross had died of AIDS, and he himself, or his partner died of AIDS-related illnesses, and he himself would succumb to the same in 1996. And he was making this art like about togetherness and about the idea of like, this is for him where the absolute happens. This is where it happens, is in memory. This is where he can be reunited with his lover. And this body of work he did as well, these billboards where he simply like a bed that's unmade with the imprints of two people's heads. And it's, of course, like the idea of like, this is the softness of the world, like in this cold, hard city, the memory of two lovers in the place where you would normally find sort of the energy of capitalism and sales and advertisement. You have this very intimate statement, and very powerful. And an artist who explores, I think, our relationship to the things around us very, very beautifully is Rachel Whiteread. And this is her work from 1996, which is made of rubber and polystyrene, and she casts the space outside of a bathtub. So it's what she does in her work. She casts the inside or the outside of objects. But what I think is so interesting is that it's not just a conceptual project about like, oh, this is not the bathtub, but this is the negative space around the bathtub. It's actually, there's so much pathos in this. I don't know if you feel it, but I feel like that somehow this object like holds so much emotion. I mean, for you must sort of sense, as I do, like the feeling of it being like a sarcophagus, right? That it holds, like it holds a body, and I see like the meaning of this like it's as if the objects that surround us have a power that we can't see because we are so accustomed to them, and it's familiar to us as a bathtub, but different enough that it's not an object of our world. Even the height of it, it's too tall for a bathtub. It's sort of become something different than you would sort of see as an ordinary bathtub. It's hard to even get our brains around the physical reality of, that there is a physical reality now to the empty space that was around this object. And if you look at her work, sometimes they're actually like hard to process, surprisingly hard to process. You'd think it'd be easier. But even this is about memory, right? It's about the memory of an object, because there was something there that is no longer, and what you're holding is you have a holder for that memory. So in many ways, I read this as similar to what Felix Gonzalez Torres was suggesting, in that the memory can be more powerful than the thing, because memory is the thing inside us, which is something that, an idea that, as an aside, that the 19th century painter Pierre Bonnard also believed, and I could talk about that in another lecture. Well, I probably won't, but anyway. And there, by the way, you can see Rachel Whiteread, because you get a sense of how palpable this sort of space, the smallness of that space is, by making it physical. I remember once I watched a building being torn down by some big machines for a building project, and I was like, wow, that only took like a half an hour, this whole thing. And I was like, and I realized like, oh yeah, there's like most of what buildings are is just space. It just occurred to me, like I never really thought about that. And I think that her works make that really palpable, like, oh, when she physicalizes the space that people lived in. And artists, I really need to speed it up. I've got only a few more left. So artist Anna Manzielta also is interested in how the female body can stand for something that's outside of like our social meaning, or something that has a kind of mystical meaning. So therefore, the relationship between the femininity and the earth. She creates these silhouettes, these imprints of her body in the earth to suggest a kind of goddess-like effect. Here you can see several examples of them. And what I love about it is that she's making art, and similar to Huma Baba, like this work she did recently, 2011, God of Some Things. She creates totemic sculptures of female figures that feel like archaeological finds. And she introduces elements of monsters, robots, because our idols are often some monstrous versions of ourselves. So not trying to think about art as the embodiment of modern culture, as so many artists do, but actually as like, how can I actually get away from modern culture to sort of stand for something that's transcendent, that's something that's beyond. Similarly, Kiki Smith does this work with also female figures, and she's similar to Huma Baba and Anna Manzielta. There's a kind of re-mythologizing of our myths with a feminine or female focus. So here, this is an image, this is a sculpture of Virgin Mary made of beeswax. It's her version of Virgin Mary, but it's Virgin Mary without skin. It's like she's completely vulnerable, exposed. And again, like Marina Abramovic, she says, well, you need to go through the body to get to the soul. And she said, therefore, she makes her female characters like as bodily as they can be, so that's the source. It's through the materiality that you find the spirituality. And she also remythologizes so many like Christian figures. In this case, she has Saint Genevieve, and like with a wolf, and Saint Genevieve saved Paris. I didn't know that before. And she does a lot of work with wolves too. Like in Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf stands for like sexuality, right? And it's a thing that this adolescent girl is afraid of, right? Is afraid of, like, you know, growing up and encountering sexuality. But with her and her remythologizing, like the female figures like are at peace with sexuality, which is part of their power. And then finally, the last artist I'll talk about is someone who Chutaw, and his works reference the sort of Native American textiles, but he imbues them with this meaning that I think aims to be like to speak to the poetry of our lives. So in this case, it's this says, "What would I do without you?" And the idea of like very, very simple statement, but that simple statement is sublimated within this sort of abstract-like design so that it feels more powerful. That's what poetry does. Poetry, like in some ways, takes ordinary meaning and sublimates it so that it gives it this more power, and he sublimates the meaning of language visually. Like this one, because once you enter my house, it becomes our house. These are such intimate statements in this very public way, have incredible power. And this one, which is one of my favorite, upstairs in the gallery, to say I love you right out loud. To say I love you right out loud. So beautiful. And if it just said that in plain text, it probably wouldn't have that same power. But again, like the way that it becomes like somewhat difficult to read, because it becomes like a part of some abstract design, like just makes it all the more like elusive, and therefore all the more powerful. And that's it. Questions? So I talked a little bit longer than I said I would, but let's take questions, and we're going to have both questions from the audience and questions from the audience that's not here, the virtual audience. So you can have two choices. We have microphone. Oh, Louis. Louis is going to be helping us out by, you can raise your hand, or you could just shout. You could raise your hand, just shout, it's fine. And then, when I call on you. And then we'll also intersperse that with questions from online. Yes, over here, do you want to shout, or do you want Louis to bring you a microphone?
Mike, I guess.
Okay. Oh, wait, the idea is you're going to tell your question this way, okay. That's like highly safety. Okay. Like, we are very safe here at Palm Springs Art Museum.
Well, it's a little complicated. I think it would be easier for me to say it. Okay. Which is that I really enjoyed your lecture, and so looking at all these objects of your affection, and you're struck by two things, and your poetic responses to them. These seem to be artists, some of whom were in their heyday or in total maturity in the 70s and 80s, or the younger ones maybe in the ideas of the 70s and 80s. And I wonder if this is as much of a record of your coming of age
Yeah.
as it is.
Yeah, it is. Well, there's something about like the fact that this is called, okay, did you hear the question? So the question was, a lot of these artists are 70s and 80s, and so is that because like, and obviously meaningful to you, Adam, so is this because, are they meaningful to you because you learned about them when you were learning about art? And I would say like, these are the artists that made me love art, right? So I came to the like visual qualities of art through like, basically like, I always loved in some ways the literary qualities. And I actually still value just as much like literature, poetry, philosophy, alongside art. And I think that, I struggled a little bit with like, well, do I want to like bring up artists who like might be, less, like people I like love less, maybe I don't necessarily they're not like deeply embedded in my heart, but it'll round out the picture more. And I'm like, no, that's not the point of this. Is really to show you sort of what it is that the artists who are stuck in my head, and my heart, and like yes, they are the ones who I've sort of studied and learned, but I've also exhibited a lot of these artists, and this is like when I started my career, and so that's part of why I love them, and also because this subject of humanism specifically is more popular as a subject in like the 70s and 80s, because like you have some artists today working with that, but like when you get to the topic, when we get to like the psychological aspect, I think that actually speaks more to the art that's being made now, where there's a lot more subjectivity in art than you actually had back then. So just as humanism is a kind of dirty word now in some ways for the art world, actually subjectivity back then would have been the dirty word. Like artists just being personal, like what's that? That's just being weak. That's what we thought about back then. That's the example of being unsophisticated. And so therefore, these lectures, humanism, sociology, and psychology, are actually loosely chronological because they're defining spirit of the time. Like that basically, when you start to have feminism and identity politics emerge in the 80s and 90s really strongly, then a lot of the art that's being done in this next gen period, is capsulated within that category. And then finally, I think the art today, you have a lot of room for artists to be very personal, very much telling like a story that just feels like it's their story, and what they're looking for is a kind of unique handwriting. And so it's loosely chronological, even though I said it wouldn't be. And by the way, you're not required. You can tell your friends if they want to come to the next lecture, they didn't need to come to the first one. No prior experience is necessary. Yeah.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, is like how much is this a continuation of the art from Marcel Duchamp? And I would say that what's really interesting is that I think that Duchamp, who was the artist who in some ways attributed with the founding of conceptual work, conceptual art in that tradition, he really explored the question of what is art. And I don't feel like Duchamp was very much interested in the question of how does art say something about our existence, like the fact that we are. I think he was much more interested in what is art, and what does asking the question of what is art tell us. It's an okay painting. I think it's not a great Cubist painting. It's a good Cubist painting, but like, do you see that as? I don't see that as particularly Cubist. I feel like New Descending Staircase was actually Duchamp saying, like, you know what, I'm never going to be a great Cubist painter. That's why I better start maybe doing something else. Thanks. But no, of course. He is in many ways the founder of conceptual art, but that's not what this is about. This is about humanism, you know.
I'm having an issue myself making the identification of this as being, I don't know, I feel like I was under a rock somewhere, because I'm not identifying with, this movement at all.
Well, it's not. It's not so much a move. It's not a movement. I'm not describing a movement. I'm describing I'm describing artists that I'm drawn to, that I categorize under, that I find a thread that runs through them. I mean, and basically what I would say is that what I think that may be giving you a little bit of difficulty is you're trying to just find a category, and maybe it's best not to try to find a category. Oh, well, good. Oh, good. Oh, good. I'm glad. And yes, and I would say this is that the way that, well, anyway, the fact that the expansion of art into these totally different mediums, that's something that I think is the sub-story behind this. That art is no longer just painting and sculpture, that art is performance, that art is found objects, that art is all organic, all these different things, and that ephemeral art is even not material at all. Those are all things that.
So like the NFT.
And then the NFT is maybe a new understanding of what of how art is not material. Yeah. Yes.
It's interesting. I was really impressed with how much you personally were getting out of these particular artists. And you disclosed a moment ago that you showed them. And I was reflecting as we were listening to it that we're probably similar age, that when we used to, most of the art we appreciate most that we collected in the 80s was we were in the galleries, we knew the artists, we had them home for dinner. Mm-hmm. So the humanism came out of not just the piece of art, because I was thinking, boy, he's really perceptive. It was actually knowing the artist and having an inside story. And then you said a moment ago that most of these were artists that you showed, so I assume you had a personal connection with them. And do you think that has something to do with probably with all of us, that if there's more than just what's in the art, but if we actually get to know the artist? And we've had this discussion that now that you buy online, which we don't do, but that there's been this distancing that we're from Toronto, but we spent our 80s to escape the boring of being lawyers, hanging out art galleries and inviting artists home and buying the work. And those are the pieces I treasure today, but it's just as much the artists and getting to know them and what they, not just from what I saw on the canvas, but it took the two pieces together to get that humanism factor out of it. Could you comment on that? Do you think that's part of your...
I would just say that I don't know about... I would say that I do really feel like when I know artists well, then I could really see in some ways how they are the vehicle for these these ideas, like how what their art is some expressing some of the issues that they are dealing with. And it's funny, I used to not care about that, but I now am very, very like convinced that like what matters, to me is how an artist sort of uses who they are to be able to find some way of condensing it all into their art. And the more, if you can know them, you can know what they make better. And I would say that for a lot of these people, when I exhibited them, I never met them. Like Joseph Beuys is dead, Marina Abramovic is still alive, but I only met her briefly, and Bas Otterlike was dead. So it's not necessarily I met them, but I do believe in what you're saying, though. I think there's something about meeting an artist where you really understand like how they are the sponge that pulls the world around them and releases it into its art. Yeah, that's a good point. Do we have any questions from the audience? I mean, not from the audience, from the virtual audience? Just to kind of make them not feel like they're totally left out. I mean, I really want to reward you guys for showing up, but still. No, they're quiet? Okay, that's fine. Okay, so yes, hi Jessica.
I don't know if I even know how to ask this question. Okay, so do you think that these artists, do you think that these artists know ahead of time the story or the message that we are going to receive as the viewer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or do you think that's essential to creating a piece of art?
No, I think that what happens is that an artist makes some. That's a good question, and you said it very well. The artist has something to communicate, and it's a little bit like I think of it a little bit like therapy, in the sense that what your therapist will do is take what you say, reflect it back to you in a way that is not the way that you tell your own story, but it comes entirely from what they hear you say. So therefore, like whenever I work with an artist, and that's the thing I look for the most, is to be able to say, I'm gonna tell your story in a way that's sort of a reflection back of my attempt to understand as best I can what you're telling me. And I'm going to give it in my own words, not yours. So that's what it's about. And you know what, though? Like, I'd say this is probably every one of the artists, that I talked about would say, like, oh, that's more or less like how accurate, or that's interesting way of looking at it. Like, Yves Klein never spoke about the balloons as a kind of an idea of traveling, and he might object to that reading, but I definitely know that from seeing all of his art that he was obsessed with the idea of the relationship between the finite and the infinite, right? And so it's not too much of an extension to be able to get to that. And so, what I do when I talk about art is I do my best to be as true to what I see, and not just sort of like riff off of it. Like, oh, I just want to talk about what interests me, but I really try hard to talk about what I see in the art. And I feel like that gives me something that is like true to them, but also maybe not the same language that they would use, and true to me, but not something that I would come up with if it weren't for them. Yeah.
Basically what you said, what did that process look like? Like, what are you drawing on? The context of the time, the context within the work of art?
Well, first thing you do is, yeah.
To get inside the mind.
Yeah, well, the one thing that you want to do is you want to look hard at what you see. And that's basically, mostly what you do is you look hard at what you see. So, for example, like this performance work that Yves Klein did, if let's say that he would have given one balloon to everybody who walked in the gallery and told that person to to carry that balloon home with them and keep it in their house, and then after a few days let it go, then that would be he'd be trying to get at something different. So it's what was he trying to get at? And so you look at everything they do to create what they've created and the decisions they've made, and that should give you a lot. For example, if it would be very different, this work, the David Hammons work, if he would have been dressed like a bum, if he would have been dressed like he was just like he was dressed like an indigent person who was just trying to sell art, well then it would be harder to read him as this spiritual figure creating these encounters. It's possible, but it'd be more like you read him as really commenting on the stereotype of the hustler or the drug dealer or something like that. And if the snowballs weren't have been as beautifully sort of made, then you would read it as much more ironic, let's say. Or if they were sold for $1,000 each, you'd read that as more ironic. And here I read it as much more genuine. So it's really about really looking carefully about what the artist creates, and then also looking at as much of their art as you can so that you really understand, actually, for example, the work that when Francis Alice pushes the ice down the street, that actually he always is exploring these ways of exploring ephemerality. That's a theme that runs throughout his work. It's part of his handwriting, so to speak. And this work is not necessarily about the relationship between the hardness of things and the softness of bodies. It's not about the relationship. His work is not about this sort of relationship between cold and warm. That it's actually about what it means to do something in the world. And I know that because I know enough of his work to be able to make that judgment. Now, somebody could look at this and say, "Oh, this is about pain because it's very painful to touch ice, and to move it like that." And so, yes, so you could say that it's about endurance. But I would say, listen, if this was really about endurance, why would it be ice? Why would it probably be steel? So if it's the fact that it's ice says something. So that's really what it takes. It really takes looking carefully, and I would say that each of you can do that. Any work of art, just by the way you do it is simply describe what it is you see. Some people will say to me, I saw an artist who created a work of art, and it was just nothing. It was just nothing. Well, what did you see there? It was just, I saw nothing. Well, what specifically made you see nothing? And then they say, well, I saw that they had this. There was a drawing, but it had been erased. Well, that's something. There's a drawing that was erased. That's not nothing. That's something. And so look specifically at the way that they frame the thing and all the decisions that are involved in that, and that's how you get to what the meaning sort of starts to be. Well, we have no more questions. We have one more question. Let's do one more question. Okay, over here. Yes.
Well, I want to thank you so
Oh.
much because I've struggled for many, many years in responding to more, for lack of a better word. Hi. Can you hear me? Thank you so much because I think you've really broadened my knowledge about, how to respond to art that isn't necessarily pretty.
Yeah.
And
Could I just interrupt you for 1 second and say, generally, if it's not beautiful, look for allegory.
yeah. And I think we probably have all had the experience of going to a gallery or a museum and standing in front of a work of art and not knowing anything about it, and we respond to it in a certain way, and then when we're educated about it,
Oh, so that's what it was. So I guess I don't know if it's a question, but I guess it's like, how do you feel about, is there a wrong response to art?
Yeah.
You
And
know,
I've-
there's a more educated one, and also you did sort of answer some of the questions I had about your interpretation of these works seems to have been corroborated by your knowledge of the artist and the body of work that each of these artists have done over time. But, you know, if you're just looking at an individual piece and you respond to it without knowing anything about it, is that as valid a response as the person who is as educated as you are?
Yeah, well, I'd say this is that it's not my education that makes my response valid. It's not because I'm not bringing necessarily my knowledge of what I've read, but I'm bringing my skill at looking, and I think that everybody is free to make their judgments, and that's what we should all do. But what we're doing, though, is there are more or less careful and sophisticated ways of looking at things. Because, again, like, you know, if somebody would just, you know, say that, like, oh, this work is about, like, global warming. Like, well, and then they say, like, well, that's just like what I get out of it, and you can't argue with me. I'd say, okay, well, you can read it that way, and I would say that if you kind of read all the other works the artist has done, you see how if he was really about dealing with global warming, then why is he pushing it around the city, right? Why doesn't he? And it's sort of really also have to be about work, too. And so therefore, I want to do is I want to encourage people to make their own associations, but to also do the work of looking really closely as to, like, well, if it was about that, then maybe why was he doing this, and really ask the hard questions, because then you're really plumbing the depths of what it is you're seeing, not just sort of making a free association. You're making a deep association and a deep reading, and I would rather you make any reading rather than say, I'd rather you make any association than say, well, what does the curator say it means? So that's like a given. And once you're interested in making associations, then I'd say, like, please keep going, go deep, challenge yourself to, like, ask questions more. Well, then why is it like this? Why do you do this? Why the decision to why ice? Why the city? Why not in the countryside? Those are all questions that I feel like you could pose of yourself to be able to ask questions. And I actually do a workshop, and we probably will do that at this museum at some point, called Art Fitness Training, which is about how to look at art, which is just gives you these basic skills where you just basically, like, teach yourself, like, what do I see? And that's most of the work happens by simply asking yourself, what do I see? And you say everything you see. You see, oh, I see a photograph of a man in a street. I see the street is actually really kind of like not a very fancy street. I see that this is pushing a block of ice, and that he's like leaned over into it. You describe every single thing you see, and then you could say, well, how would it be different? How would it be different if he was just pushing this along with his foot nice and easily? How would it be different if it was on like a cart? You know, and then all of a sudden, like, you can sort of see, like, oh, well, what does it say then about the fact that he's pushing it physically with his body? I think all those things start to help you have more sophisticated ways of reading art, and we'll have more of those conversations as we go along. And I feel like that was the question also that relates to the Duchamp question. Is I feel like now I understand what you're getting at. Is basically you're saying, like, oh, what you're looking at here is a whole body of art that's using just a sort of almost like a different vocabulary. And where's this vocabulary coming from? And I get it, because I think this is the vocabulary of contemporary art. I mean, maybe not, some people might be exploring humanist themes. There's actually not many people exploring humanist themes, and probably nobody in the field of contemporary art talks about humanism except for me, honestly. So don't go around saying, oh, there's a movement called the humanism. Or it's not. There's no movement. There's no movement. Just Lerner. But this is my reading. It's my reading. And I add also the only question that matters is it convincing? Like, you know what? Like, I can make a convincing case that this is a humanist statement. That's what I feel like I'm doing, is I'm trying to be persuasive. And by showing you, like, well, if you look at this, like, you could see that, you know, Anna Manzielta is often nature, creating these forms that look like they're archaeological. Like, she's really trying to get to something that's pre-modern society. Anyway, so all I'm offering you is a reading, and the best in that reading is to give you enough evidence that I believe that it's true, and you may or may not be convinced. And listen, if you are convinced that, you know, letting balloons go into the air is a metaphor for the finite and the infinite, by God, I've got you one. You know, and I don't really mind that you don't buy basketball hoop work or the lawn chairs. It's fine. I'm happy if you're convinced by one or two of these. That's beautiful. Oh, that's fine. All right. Well, thanks, guys. So next week is going to be sociology, and that's basically artists who explore our society physically. Like, what are the rules? What are the norms of our society? And how can we criticize them? How can we explore them, poke them, push them, understand them? Thanks.